I've got 10 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lynn Niblink. I'm with the Department of Human Services Division on Mental Health and Disabilities, and we are very pleased to bring you today a webinar by Sandy Reese, who is the National Trainer and Consultant for IPS from the IPS Employment Center at Westat. And I don't know, I don't have much more to say. I'm just going to give it to Sandy and let you take it away.
Thanks, Lynn. So good morning, everybody. As Lynn mentioned, I work as a consultant and trainer for the IPS Employment Center, which is actually now located. We moved recently our center to New York, to Columbia University. So we're housed there within a training center, and it's called RFMH. And I actually live, though, in Portland, Oregon, where I've spent my entire life here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm always interested to learn about new states. I'm fascinated by Iowa. I've never been there before. I originally here worked for a very large comprehensive mental health agency that provided psychosocial rehabilitation, including a drop-in center and groups and classes and recreational activities. And this was back in the 80s. And we had a very large employment program there. And so I started off on the psychosocial rehab side of things, and I was a case manager for a while. And I eventually started, I became the program director for an employment program. And I ran that it was a very large employment program. We had a large sheltered workshop there that had like up to 90 stations. I mean, so it was large. And it was like we were bringing in work from electronic assembly plants around our area. We're kind of known as the Silicon Valley of Oregon. So Intel's here, and Fujitsu and Merix and Tektronix that would come into this workshop. We had a mobile janitorial crew that would go out and clean buildings. We had what you call an enclave at Tektronix, where we had consumers that worked together as a group disassembling computers. We had what was called at that time a cluster program. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I mean, there's so many different types of employment programs. We're at Merix, which was an electronic assembly plant, a large plant. We had a staff position placed there on site, and then we had people that worked in various positions within Merix, and they were and our staff person. So we had all these different employment programs, and around the 1990s or so, I started exploring alternatives to what we were doing, because I kind of wondered about, it seems to me we have all these people that are coming into the workshop. They're in the janitorial crew, they're in the enclave. We had one employment specialist, supported employment specialist, that was going to get people jobs in the community. But what I recognized was people were coming in, but people weren't leaving. So it was what you would call that traditional almost warehousing of people is what the term we used to use, where people would come into work. They would go through a 3-week we had a very, very close relationship with vocational rehabilitation. I mean, for decades we had. And people would come in for a work adjustment training. We'd recognize they needed to work on skills. And so they need to stay in the workshop after 3 weeks. And they weren't going. So I was kind of like, there's something wrong with these programs. We're not doing what I think is best in the interest of people. So I started exploring some other models, and found about IPS. And this, at the time, IPS was which stands for Individual Placement and Support, was being developed and researched at Dartmouth College, which is in New Hampshire. And that's where the first research study was done. And it was a study where they shut down some day treatment programs and converted it to supported employment and tested the results to find out if they could help people go to work. And I started hearing about it, became curious. And in the state of Oregon, there were a couple other agencies that also became curious. And we went together and did a lot of consensus building in the 1990s and eventually received this SAMHSA grant to implement IPS. And so we implemented IPS at my agency in 2000. It was actually November 14th. I can remember the day, 2000. It was a really big deal. And so we ran this IPS program, and it's quite a story because at the time we were also shutting down our state hospital, which was called Damish State Hospital. This is a hospital where people went to be, basically they were institutionalized. So this isn't where people went for a few days and left. They had been there for years and years. So we were exiting people out of the state hospital that had been there for 8, 10 years, 12 years. The state put out this giant grant, RFP, where they wanted to help people coming out of the state hospital to have very intensive wraparound services. And they went into this, the state did, with vocational rehabilitation, who said, we want to see people go into competitive jobs. And in the state of Oregon, they wanted 2 sites to apply, and only 1 site did, and it wasn't mine. They got a hold of us and said, you're one of the largest employment programs in the state, and we want you to apply for this grant. And we did. And so we started, the same time we were implementing IPS, we started taking these individuals from the state hospital, and they came into our program. And I just remember this woman named Stephanie. And Stephanie had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, disorganized, had auditory hallucinations. Her medication were not well controlled, but she kept saying she wanted to work. She just kept saying she wanted to work. And we're kind of like, Stephanie, geez. I mean, we just, in our head, we just had a hard time imagining Stephanie working in a competitive job, which is the charge that vocational rehabilitation gave us. It's like, you need to help people get competitive jobs in the community, not your sheltered workshop. And so Stephanie kept saying she wanted to work, and we said, well, we'll put you through this 3-week assessment in our sheltered workshop and see whether you can work or not, and we'll help you get a job in the community. And she was in the sheltered workshop for a few days and stopped coming. And so we kind of like, see, she's not ready to work. I mean, it just proved to us that she wasn't ready. And then vocational rehabilitation got a hold of us. They were like, this isn't what we asked you to do. You need to help her get a job. And so I had this wonderful employment specialist named Maureen, who listened to Stephanie and found out that she had animals when she was growing up. She had pets and loved dogs. And so Maureen went and built a relationship with the manager at Petco. And the manager said she was willing to give Stephanie a try as a groomer. And so Maureen helped initially to get Stephanie into this job. And lo and behold, Stephanie starts showing up for work every day at 8 o'clock in the morning. And she became a worker like you would not have ever imagined in your life that she was capable of doing. And it's not to say other things didn't change during that time. Atypical medications came out that were better. She had a lot of really good wraparound services from her treatment team. That employment was critical in her life to her recovery. It became as crucial as anything else in her life. And I always say to people, if I could show you a picture of Stephanie when she came in to our program at the beginning, and if you were to see a picture of her 6 months after she started working at Petco, you would never know physically it's the same person. You would never know. There's no way. I wish I had taken a picture, because I tell this story all the time. And it just, to this day, I mean, it was just life-changing for her. And so that, to me, was this crucial turning point in my life, where it was like, this is the right thing to be doing for people. And you can't tell me this person's too disabled and can't work, because it's just not true. And I've seen it over and over. And Stephanie was the first example. And there were many others to come that were just, to me, like, wow, I didn't think so. And we're proved wrong over and over. So I became convinced IPS was it. This is kind of a long story, so I apologize, but I think it's an important part of why I do what I do. And eventually, over the course of time, since we implemented IPS at that time, we shut down our shelter workshop altogether. and it was a business. I mean, it was a manufacturing plant. It was a business, and we shut it down. We discontinued the crew. This was over time. This didn't happen overnight, and we totally converted to IPS. And I never regret it. I just never regret it. I think about all the effort and time that went into keeping people there in the building and providing employment services that didn't result in a lot happening. So, there might be some, but not like this. So anyway, enough about me. I went on to become a state trainer in Oregon for IPS because the state implemented it. And then eventually I got a call from Dartmouth, and they asked me if I consider being a project director for a huge study that was going on. It was a Social Security study. So I got involved with them, and then I moved on to doing this nationally. So, and I just love every opportunity I have to work with states because it means that I hope it's expanding and more people have access to employment that helps people get jobs. So I'm curious because I've talked about myself, and we've got a number of people on the call, and I'm wondering if any of you have any experience with IPS. So I don't know. I really hope during this training that people feel comfortable talking. I know sometimes it's hard to do that, but I hope we have some brave individuals that are willing to speak up during the training, and we'll be glad to unmute you to speak, or if you could type in the chat box and let us know. But I'm just curious, kind of like the audience, and if any of you have had experience with IPS. So Lynn, I think I see a couple of things in the chat box.
I'm not seeing anything other than what Amy and I put in there. I wonder if you do want anybody to like raise their hand.
That's a good idea.
Raise hand icons.
You know where your hand is? The hand icon. Raise your hand.
Although we don't have, very much implementation throughout Iowa, so I don't know how many people would have
exposure to it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just good to know, and if anybody has.
And you never know, somebody may have come from somewhere else and who's doing it. So
right. Or if you've heard of it, or I know there's been some pilot sites in Iowa, so I didn't know if anybody from those sites had joined the webinar.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any raised hands at this point. Oh, okay. Steve Gilroy does say he has worked with Navigate program, which uses the IPS principles. Thank you, Steve. Good to know.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And Navigate is interesting because Navigate is for young adults, right? Although it's a popular name.
It's Navigate is for people with recent diagnosis of psychosis.
Right.
It's a first-time psychosis type program, but it does use the IPS principles for that rapid employment and just getting people into the competitive workplace. And I have seen with the clients that I've worked with that it has made a huge difference, just basically in their life and just the way they perceive the harder times that they have because they have something positive to work with.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm familiar with Navigate. I mean, you might work with Dave Lind, who helps a lot with Navigate, but and IPS. But thank you for that. Yeah, those young adults. I mean, it's critical that we help young people with their employment and education. The first episode. Lindsay has her hand up, so she has experience. And is it Caitlin?
I was just going to jump on. We do have quite a few on here that work with Choice Employment Services. We kind of have our main hub in Northeast Iowa, but also have a central region down by Ankeny. And we provide supportive employment services. And we're really excited to learn more about IPS and this approach and the principles that Steve just touched on.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So I should probably, by saying that, it makes me think I need to move on, okay? So we can actually see this PowerPoint and the principles, and hopefully I will get this PowerPoint up and going for you all. And I usually have to, let me see from the beginning. And I usually have to change this around so you don't see. Okay, are we good? Can you all see?
There you go. Yep, looks good.
Okay, so this is one of 3 in a series. And so we're going to start off mainly thinking about, IPS as an introduction and using evidence-based practices to help move recovery forward. Okay, let me try. There we go. So, what I wanted to do to begin with, and this is just may seem rudimentary to all of you, but I think it's just important for us to think about this in our own lives, to bring it home to our own personal lives. And so when you think about the definition for mental health, mental health is on a continuum. We all have mental health. And so there's a continuum. And on one end of the continuum, we have major depression, anxiety. We have people like Stephanie that are on this end, right? And on the other end of the continuum, we have total well-being. I mean, this is like, there's nothing wrong in the world. Everything is right in your world. And I have to tell you, I don't know, it looked like it was all right in some people's world there, but like Steve's world, but I have never met anybody that's on that end of the spectrum. So most of us are in the middle. So all of us live, so this continuum is on a fluid state, right? We're going to move on the continuum some. We're going to move back and forth. We're somewhere in the middle, but we're going to move depending on what happens in our life. And so we live with daily risks in our lives that can impact how we're doing. And so just things like that are really important, like divorce, caring for elderly parents, losing a loved one, losing a job, living with a disease, substance use, surviving abuse, so all kinds of things that people experience can move you on that continuum. So think about recent episodes in our life. I mean, I see myself as in the middle most of the time, but think about this. How did the pandemic impact you? I mean, I think this was an event that really brought home to the majority of the population, how fragile we can be at times. And so this was the first time I walked into my local supermarket when the pandemic started. I had my mask on for the first time. I remember my heart was racing. My glasses were steaming up. I was like, I need to get in and out of here as fast as possible. There's no food. There was obviously this rush on food. So you just think about, just isolation that occurred with people, depression, people losing jobs. So it's just one of these things where I think it's important for us to consider where we all are. It's kind of a thin line we walk at times. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're working with people. So regarding this webinar, though, getting back to IPS, there are 4 main points that are really important, having to do with people that have mental illnesses. And so what we do know is that people that have serious mental illnesses, and again, people like Stephanie and other people want to work. We know that. They tell us that. We have surveys to show it. And people can and do want to work. I mean, they are capable of working. And IPS provides a roadmap for implementation, which helps people obtain employment. And so with IPS, we have what we call a fidelity scale. And the fidelity scale is a 25-item scale. And it's like a roadmap. I mean, it's going to tell you if you follow it, people say over and over and over again, if you follow it, you get the outcomes that you're supposed to get. And the services improve that are provided to individuals. And that's what it's all about. It's good, high quality services. And we believe that work is everybody's business. So it's not just the business of employment staff, it's everybody's business. You want everybody on the team and everybody thinking about it, and leadership at agencies, and everybody needs to be considering how employment impacts recovery. So IPS, again, stands for Individual Placement and Support. And as I mentioned, it was developed in the 1990s. So this is not a new model. It was developed and researched in the 1990s. And it was developed around helping people with serious mental health conditions return to work. And so it, it has research behind it, and I'll talk more about that. It's manualized, so we actually have a guidebook that helps lead practitioners. There's the fidelity scale I talked about that you can follow, and there's lots of, and I already mentioned the research, but so anyway, it's been provided now across the United States and in many, many other countries, and we'll talk more about that. So far, there have been 28 randomized controlled trials for IPS. And those are the gold standard. Randomized controls are the gold standard for medical research. So, right now you could probably relate to this best by thinking about, research around vaccinations, right? So, that Pfizer and Durham and Johnson & Johnson have been doing these research studies, and those are randomized controlled trials. So half the people are going to get whatever the vaccination is, Pfizer, and half the people are not. They're going to get something else, a placebo, something that is not the actual vaccination. And then they test the efficacy of the vaccination, how well it works against the population of people that are not getting it, right? So with IPS, what we did in all these research studies, and it's not we, it's people out there that have done this. I thought it was Dartmouth at first, but you will see this is happening all over the world. They will set up a group that's providing services as usual. So those are employment services that are just being offered in the community, whatever those may be. And then they set up IPS, where they ask a site like my program to do IPS, and then they compare it. So they can compare it to perhaps things like we have a program, mental health program that refers people to vocational rehabilitation or whatever the model may be, and there's a comparison. And so these were the characteristics of the randomized control trials. So these are the comparisons between. So 12 of the studies of the 28 were done in the United States, and 16 of the studies have been done outside the United States. And 2/3 of them had at least an 18-month follow-up. So checking back in with people to find out if they were still working, what the results of working had on their life. Total enrollment was 6,486 participants so far that have been involved in these randomized controlled trials. In most of the majority, people were recruited from the not-for-profit community mental health agencies, much like the one I described that I worked in. In most studies, control groups receive services as usual, and sometimes those are called best practice, and sometimes that can get confusing. So I had to ask Gary Bond, who's our super researcher at the Employment Center, and he said, for an example, here what we were talking about was best practice. Maybe some of you might have been used to this model for a while. And again, this is something we actually implemented. It was through Boston University, and it was called Get, Choose, Keep. So they would help people establish goal, and that goal could be in different domains. So it might be a social goal, it might be an employment goal. And so they did a study just to see, like, okay, if you're working with a Choose, Get, Keep model, are your chances of getting employment more likely than if you're getting IPS, right? And so that's a comparison group. Now, Gary says promising practice means that they were developed based upon a theory of research, but there's insufficient amount of original data to be collected to determine the effectiveness of the practice. So it's promising, but they don't have rigorous studies behind it to design. So those are studies, and I can't tell you which ones those would be, but those are studies. Maybe when somebody says it's promising, then you'll say, it sounds like you've been doing some research on that. It'd be interesting to see that. I always am interested and to hear about, when there's other studies being done. So these are some of the characteristics. This is where the research was done. So if you look, here's the first one, which was in New Hampshire that we talked about over here. The black bar is IPS, the red bar is services as usual. And you can look at where they've been. I mean, they're just all over. Alabama, Canada, Australia is huge. Australia is just across the entire country, which, as you know, is a giant country, and they're implementing like this across the country. And there was in 2007 here, this was 6 European countries. And the story is that that the man that was the principal investigator for the study actually thought that it couldn't be done. So he helped conduct the research study to prove that it couldn't be done in Europe. So are other people hearing a buzzing noise? Is it just me?
No, there's, I think somebody is unmuted inadvertently and we're hearing some
Okay.
office noise.
So I don't know if Amy can look at that. She might be able to.
Yeah, I can't see anybody's microphone flashing other than yours, Sandy. I also was hearing the buzzing, but it didn't appear that it was coming from someone else, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, if it's me, we'll try.
No, it's stopped now, I think, so.
And then came back. Okay, well, hopefully it'll go away because I can't mute myself. That'd be hard.
I think it's Bob Lincoln. He's unmuted, and I think maybe his coming up when I was hearing the sound.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
All right. Whew. Okay, we figured that one out. Teamwork. Okay, so anyway, this is where the randomized control trials have been done, and you can see Japan, Quebec, Sweden, this is what the study showed. So 27 out of 28 studies showed significant advantages for IPS. And one small study in China had borderline significance. And I believe they had a very small group of people, and it was just difficult to determine. But Gary is great because if you look, not all of them had the best results, and he can tell you what happened in each one of those studies. And you could request the research study on any one of these 28, and we could send it to you. That was done, that's been written up. And so the outcome rate was 55% for people enrolled in IPS and 25% for control groups. So you're more than twice as likely to get a competitive job if you're enrolled in an IPS program. Do we have any questions so far on this? This is the kind of stuff that's kind of a little bit on the nerdy side of this. And I used to not like it very much, but now I kind of do. So it was a whole different language for me when I started. So is IPS effective? It is. I mean, what we found is that people in IPS attain employment faster, which Steve was alluding to when we talk about rapid job search. They hold jobs for a longer period of time and they work more hours. So when you do the comparison, they also have this result. And it's effective compared to alternative vocational programs, regardless of people's background, ethnicity, gender, social economic status. And so it doesn't seem to matter. People will say to us in inner city DC, it can't be done. In a really rural community, it can't be done. And we haven't found that to be true. And I like to talk about this because I know every state I work with will say, but we have some really rural locations. And as I mentioned, I'm from Portland, Oregon. It's a fairly large, one of those big Western bloc states. So we have areas, we have a county that's bigger than the state of New Hampshire that doesn't have a lot of people in it, and it has an IPS program. So it works there. And this is when I just like to show people, because this is called Land's End in Homer, Alaska. And Homer, Alaska is a village. It's a fishing village. And primarily it's a fishing village, not during the winter. It's during the nicer months, which are short in Homer, Alaska. And so things pretty much shut down. I mean, it's a small community and that's it. And they have a program there called South Peninsula Behavioral Health. And John McGee is the supervisor there of the program, and they have a dynamite IPS program. So I'm just saying, if it can be done in home or it can be done practically anywhere, it takes a can-do attitude, I'll tell you. And John knows everybody in town. And he tells me the kids all go to the same hospital, all go to the same high school, the same school. And, he'll sit next to people, they're business people at basketball events, and talk to them about employment. So he knows everybody in the area. It's really fun to go out with him and do job development. So we're going to talk about the eight IPS practice principles. And, I welcome you all to jump in. And this is where I think it's really important to share your thoughts about it, because some of these feel like a real rub for people. It's kind of like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is going to work, or I have concerns about it, or and that's okay. I always say, speak up, because I can't help address what that might be, or find information if I don't know what you're concerned about. And this first one is one of the principles that seems to like give people a little bit of like, I'm not so sure. So the first practice principle is open to anyone who wants to work. And it's also called zero exclusion. So zero exclusion means if anybody says, I want to work, and they raise their hand, they have access to the employment program, regardless of whether they're currently using substances, regardless of whether they're compliant with medication, regardless of whether they have a legal history, regardless of how bad their hygiene might be, regardless of whatever that might be. If they raise their hand, like Stephanie, and they say they want to go to work, they are referred to the employment program. So what do people think about that? And you can type it in. Do you have concerns? There's certain thoughts you have, like, if somebody's coming in, they're using substances, how will that impact employment? Anybody brave enough to speak up? You can be unmuted if you want. You can be unmuted, or you could type something in the chat box.
This is Lindsay. I used IPS when I was in Minnesota, then also in Northwest Iowa, and it is really effective for all clientele, from various ranges, from people with co-occurring disorders to people with intellectual disorders. It's really been effective and useful, and it's really helped with the mental health aspect, and as well as just the quality of life overall.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So tell me, how did you, even though people had substance use disorders, how did you address that if somebody was referred to the IPS team?
So with our agency, we have releases with IPS, and so we would have them come talk to us once a month, and part of our staffing, and we talk about the cases that we have with them, and kind of talk about how that might be implementing various factors for their employment in terms of, possible transportation issues or attendance issues, and how to navigate that with the individual, as well as on our terms as to what we're doing for mental health, but also from employment side as well.
Oh, great. So Lindsay, you're on the mental health side of the team?
I'm a mental health therapist.
Right. Oh, great. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So what Lindsay's talking about, we're going to get to that. So, with IPS, it's not just employment. You're working with the mental health team, right? So if issues are coming up regarding substance use, you have a team of people that are helping think about, what supports can we put in place for this individual? What challenges might come up? How can we address substance use? Is the person in treatment? So the idea, and people sometimes think when they hear this, it's like people are using substances and we're just going to throw them into a job, right? And so, like Lindsay's saying, we don't do that. We're working together. But what we don't say to somebody is, you need to be abstinent first. Otherwise, you can't receive employment. You need to stop using first. Like, one comes before the other. And what we found when we say that to people is they disengage because they're like, I'm not ready to stop using, right? So they'll disengage from the program if they go hand in hand together. And so employment becomes a part of the treatment. What we find is if you say to people, using substances may impact your likelihood of either getting a job or keeping a job. And so we think treatment's important, and we want to help you accomplish this goal that's important to you. Employment's important to you. So how do we help you to do that? And you're working side by side, and you're giving people hope that they can move on with their life. So it's not like prove yourself first. It's like, we believe in you. We believe you're capable, and we're going to work together. And sometimes, it doesn't work out. It's not perfect, but typically people can learn. So I work with this guy named Richard who he was in our IPS program. He really, really wanted a job at Intel in production. And as I mentioned, we knew Intel well from our workshop when we worked with them. We knew they did drug testing, and Richard was smoking pot every night. And this is before it was legal in Oregon. Not that employers need to hire you anyway, but he was smoking pot every night. And we said, Richard, we know that Intel will drug test you, and we advise that you stop using in order to get this job. Let's weigh the pros and cons of your use, okay? Stop using, refrain from using, whatever, but we can't go in there and say to Intel, Richard's a top employee when we know he's going to test positive. We knew it. So anyway, Richard was absolutely convinced that we were wrong, absolutely convinced we were wrong. And, we tried, everything we could do to support him and help him to understand. But he said, I'm going to apply. And it's, of course, a free country. Richard can go in and apply if he wants to. And so Richard went in and applied for Intel. And lo and behold, he gets the job, and he comes back to us and says, see, I got the job. And we're like blown away. How did that happen? So, but it was contingent on the drug test coming back negative, and it came back 2 days later positive. So they let him go. And Richard comes into us and he says, he came in and he says to us, so you were right. They let me go. And he said, now I know what I need to do. I need to stop using if I want to work at Intel. And he said, and they said, if I can come back and test again, they'll rehire me because they did a good job for the first 2 days. So he did that, and he went back and started working at Intel, and he was successful. But sometimes we can talk ourselves blue in the face, convincing somebody of what they need to do, and going and applying for a job like all of us do, that would have happened to any one of us, is a consequence that happens. It's kind of like a wake-up call. It's like, okay, I heard it from the source, so I got to clean it up. But again, maybe a little long story for zero exclusion, but this is my favorite practice principle, because there is absolutely no crystal ball that's going to predict who's going to be successful. I love this one. The focus is on competitive jobs. So that is jobs that are in the community, that have at least minimum wage or the same pay as coworkers, that are integrated, that are not set aside for somebody that has a disability. The person owns the job, the paycheck comes to them from a business. So it's a competitive job that anybody in the community can apply for. As I think it was Steve mentioned, we talk about rapid job search. So this is not rapid job placement. This is rapid job search, which means that when people come in for services and they meet with the employment specialist, the IPS specialist, the first face-to-face contact is had. The specialist starts learning about the person, what they want to do, their work history. It's a very, very comprehensive, involved process that we have to learn about people. But within 30 days, they start meeting with employers face-to-face to learn about businesses. So within 30 days of the first face-to-face, we track how long did it take you to meet face-to-face with an employer in the community. So with Stephanie, when she said, I want to work with animals, I'm afraid we would have missed the mark on this one because it took a while. That, how long did it take before we met with Petco or PetSmart or the Humane Society or a veterinarian's office? How long did it take before we started exploring that particular goal for that person so that we could find out what the job involves and how good of a fit it would be for Stephanie? Do people have thoughts about that? Why would we do that? I mean, what's the rationale for moving out quickly and starting to look for jobs right away? Anybody want to take a guess at it?
For one, this is Lynn. For one thing, that rewards the person for having the desire and the courage to try to.
Exactly. It doesn't encourages it. It's kind of like strike while the iron's hot, right? This person's motivated to go. And it also says to people, it sends a message to people that I believe in you. I believe what you want to do. I believe you want to work. I believe in you. Let's get going. This idea before when I was running the employment program of show us, prove it, go through this, go through that, we're going to put you in this, we'll do this and that, and, continue to figure out if you're ready is really discouraging. I mean, it kind of says to somebody, show us first, instead of like, we believe in you and we're going to do a really good job of making sure that we find out what your skills are, what your strengths are, and matching that with employers. And we'll talk a bit more about that, which is the next one, systematic job development. So this is that the IPS specialist, also called the employment specialist, makes 6 face-to-face employer contacts. That's okay. Stopped and started. We meet face-to-face with 6 employers that have hiring authority every week. And that's in order to learn about the business. And we have a whole approach, systematic approach to doing this. It's a 3-step approach that I love doing as a part of a training. It's a day-long training. And in the afternoon, we go out and actually practice. And so you go out and you meet with employers. And what we want to do is briefly introduce ourselves, say what we do, who we work for, the purpose of our visit. And then I'm asked to schedule an appointment to return and learn about the business. And then you walk out the door with an appointment. And then you return in order to sit down with the employer and learn about the business. It's not to promote your program. It's not to get somebody in that job. It's to learn all about the business and what they do there, so that as a specialist, you understand whether it's going to be a good match for the people you work with. Any thoughts about that? This is challenging. This is like one of the challenging things in implementing IPS, because I can tell you in the years I did it, it's very difficult to hire people that have this experience. And so people need to be trained. But it's critical because nobody else on the team, Lindsay, I don't know if Lindsay goes out and does job development as a mental health therapist, or maybe not. I don't know many that do. So it's a critical role for the specialist. Client preferences guide decisions. So this is not market driven. This is individually driven by each individual person we work with. We're going to learn what they want to do, the sort of job they want, and then help them to get that job. So, that it can be a process for people. I remember working with somebody that wanted to be an astronaut that had not gone to college, so those are things that come up. And it's like, what we ended up doing with him is finding out that it was just all about outer space, just a fascination with outer space. And we ended up getting him a job here at the Oregon Science Museum in the planetarium, which he loved, but it's just important to listen to what people enjoy doing and want to do. And why do you think we want to do that? Why are we trying to get these people into jobs that are individualized to what they want to do? Anybody want to answer that?
You'll see them be more successful if they're doing duties that kind of mirror their strengths.
Exactly, Caitlin. Exactly. It's like if you really, really wanted to be working in mental health and somebody told you there's a job opening at McDonald's, why don't you go work there? Do you think you'd last very long? I mean, I have to tell you, I always like asking people if they're in their very first job. I mean, I had a lot of jobs in my life. You know, people will go through a process, so that's okay. But we want to get people in jobs they really want to do because they're going to stay. They'll be more satisfied. IPS provides individualized long-term supports, which means that once somebody's in a job, we don't have to go, "Whoo, you got a job, bye," you know, "Yay, congratulations," and move on to somebody else that's looking for a job. Instead, we're saying, "Great, you got a job," and we're thinking way beforehand. Okay, what are some of the challenges that have been present in jobs before? You know, where can we provide assistance? How can we avoid situations that weren't good for the person? Just putting lots of supports in place for that individual to help them be successful. And I was saying at the beginning of this training, I said, and we all need job supports. And I'm like, thank goodness Amy's there to help me out, you know, who's helping out with this webinar. She's willing to turn microphones on and off. And we all need job support. So it's not like it's, this is just something that the people we work with need. It's helpful to normalize it. And the other part about these job supports is it's not just a matter of putting people in entry-level jobs and leaving them there. It's a matter of coming back and asking, are you still satisfied with your job? Would you like a better job? Would you like more education? Do you want vocational training? Do you want technical assistance? Can we help you in those areas to advance your career? Because we want to keep helping people to advance their careers so that they get better living wages. So there's a lot that goes into that. And then as we were talking about before, and this is Lindsay, I think, that integration with treatment. So this is an unusual part of IPS, is that employment is embedded in the treatment program. So there's this expectation that the program have weekly clinical treatment team meetings that occur. So at my agency, we had, I don't know how many therapists, we had somebody that specialized in co-occurring disorders, drug, substance use, we had psychiatrists. And so they had this big clinical team meeting every week. And then all of a sudden we joined that meeting as an employment team. And at first they're like, what the heck are you doing in here? You're employment people. What do you have to do with treatment? You know, so it's awkward. It's a little awkward at first, but pretty soon you're in there and it is just amazing the evolution that takes place. All of a sudden this treatment team meeting that's focused on crisis and issues and on and on and on starts thinking about, gosh, you know, I really see this difference in people's lives that are going to work in school. And they start referring more people for employment services. And the therapists are saying, geez, this person was calling me every day. And now they stopped calling me. It's like they got a life. And, you know, people get on board. They start getting on board. And the employment team starts learning about, geez, these are some stress management techniques they're using, anger management, they're helping them out with this, you know. So they're learning techniques and helping to helping people to apply those. So it really becomes this cohesive team. And my team, after I think it would have taken a year. If you'd walked in, you wouldn't be sure who the employment people were, because people are talking about getting people jobs. The psychiatrist was reading the job leads. So that's the work is everybody's business. Now the last one is benefits counseling is included. What we do know is that, holy cow, it's Chintel. What we do know is that benefits are one of the concerns around benefits are one of the biggest barriers to people returning to work. That's a concern for people, is loss of benefits. And so we want everybody, this is a practice principle, we want everybody that we work with at IPS to have access to a certified trained benefits counselor. Not just somebody at Social Security, somebody that's a trained benefits counselor that understands work incentives, that can give people really good information. They are just the most amazing people. These, if you have an eye over, they're called CWICs, Certified Work Incentive Counselors, or WIPA, just amazing wealth of information. And so they really help people to think about, even if you have benefits, we can help you go back to work, you're going to be better off. You'll earn more money. Any thoughts about that one? And this is the end of the practice principle. So any thoughts about any of those 8 principles?
I like the benefits counseling aspect. I think a lot of the consumers that we work with here, it would be so beneficial if everybody had access to that, because so many are wondering, I make this much, how much can I work, or how long can I work each month without losing my benefits? And I don't want it to affect this. And I think a lot of the consumers would benefit from having access to that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, sometimes I go places and the standard response to everybody that says they want to go to work is, well, you can work, but you have to earn under substantial gainful employment. So you can only work part-time. You can't earn more than such and such every month. You have to. That's the only way you can go back to work. And that's the standard that consumers will hear over and over again. You can't go to work if you work over. You have to work 18 hours and that's it, a week. If you work 20 hours, then you're going to lose your benefits. And that's just not the case. So people are being given this information. It's just not the case. If they talk to certified work incentive counselors, they'll find out how to work with that.
Yeah. And I don't think, maybe you did work over your cap and you lost some of your benefits, but you're making up for it with the, income that you're making at your job too. And it kind of just balances out. And I think it's harder or more challenging for the individuals that we work with to process all of that information.
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard.
I think it's really important because it is not people's number one reason that they say they don't look for work or they don't want to go to work is because they have been told all these myths or not told enough about work incentives that are out there. So I think it's great that IPS addresses all those objections and concerns up front.
Yeah.
Sandy, I wanted to mention we are past 10 till. So do you want to skip to the slide about the quotes and then see if people have questions?
Sure.
And if there aren't any questions, then circle back and talk about the learning community?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
So these are some quotes from people that have received IPS services. And these are ones that we've taken. So when you're working, you're a part of the real world. You feel connected. Having a job gives me stability. I have something to look forward to every day. Purpose, meaning, stability, structure. I mean, we hear this. In the past, people might have used labels to describe me, such as homeless, mental ill, welfare mother. Now my titles are financial administrator, college student, and working mom. So I love those. Do we have any questions? Okay, quickly back to the learning community. So this is what it looks like. We have an international learning community that has 25 states in the United States that belong to it. There are 4 European countries that you can see, in Montreal, Canada, and New Zealand. And these are people that join our learning community. That's free. We don't charge anything. We do ask that people attend our conference. That we have, it's really and truly a learning community. We have all these calls, bi-monthly calls with everybody. We have supervisor calls, we have trainer calls, we have all these calls where people work together in order to learn how to improve services that they're providing. And then we develop materials, tons and tons, you'll find them on our website, tons of, that's there at the bottom, of materials that are free in our documentation library for people. So everybody is in this, and it's just amazing to me how hard people work together in order to continue to provide quality services. And so this is what the learning community looks like right now in the United States. So as you know, Iowa is involved in, or you may not know, this Aspire project that we have, and which is about advancing state policy as far as employment. So we hope that at one point Iowa consider joining the learning community. But there's 243 agencies and 331 teams. And we collect outcomes from all these teams. And we have an outcome portal, so we can look at like quarterly outcomes from all our sites to see how people are doing as far as getting jobs. Believe it or not, during the pandemic, we dipped, but we're at around 44% employment outcomes across the country for employment during the last quarter. So even during the pandemic, I mean, we dipped down, I think, to 39%, but these teams are amazing and dedicated to helping people continue to get jobs. So that is it for me for today. That went fast. So if you have any questions, please get a hold of me, although I did away with my slide that has my email, but you can let Lynn know or get a hold of Lynn. And I just want to thank all of you for joining the webinar today. We'll be talking again next Friday, which has to do with the social determinants in health and how does evidence-supported employment impact people's social determinants of health. So I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank people that participated, and I really appreciate your time today. So
Thank you very much for your time, Sandy. We really appreciate that you could bring us all this information today.
well, thanks everybody. Have a great day. See you next week, I hope.
All right.
Bye-bye.